Hello, this is the Kuda and Open Lab seminar on May 11, 2026. And today it's our greatest pleasure to have Frederic Fol Leymarie from Goldsmiths College, University of London. And he will talk about Art.Intelligence.Machine, A.I.M. or AIM. Frederic, the stage is yours.
Many thanks. Thank you for inviting me, and special thanks to Professor Ashish and to Mike Tam as well. So it's a pleasure to be with you. Yes, so Art, Intelligent Machine, and as you pointed out, there's a play on the acronym as well. So this should become apparent as we progress through the talk. Um, Notice that the logo that you see here was created by Daniel Berriot. I'll talk more about Daniel later, but remember that he's a well proficient graffiti artist amongst different skills. Yeah, so my talk is in two parts. First, I want to give you some motivation. So this will be more philosophical in spirit. And I will spend a bit of time expanding on especially art and intelligence. I'll say a little more about how I link that with the concept of machine. And then in the second part, I will move into concrete research projects that have been involved in the last few years, involving artists always. So I come from background in computer vision and visual perception. And many years ago, I realized that art was a fascinating domain to consider from those perspectives. I could say that a very influential book was by Rudolf Arnheim, Art and Perception, a book that he wrote in the 50s, and then with the extended version in the 70s. I discovered that much later, but it has influenced my thinking here. So why art? Because it relates to important questions that we haven't fully answered in the world of computer vision, such as the difficult topic of what we mean by aesthetics. It is also a practice. So we actually do art by doing it, by being involved in actions. And in particular, we'll come back to the topic of embodiment and the importance of embodiment in the context of my talk. Um, and then I want to emphasize that I think it's important to realize that art is not just something we do for pleasure or for entertainment or because we're bored, but in fact, I think it's critical here when we consider the notion of intelligence in humans. So a little more about that. Here's an example of visual art produced thousands of years ago. So one of the famous drawings or paintings we can find in caves from what we call primitive humans. The quality of these depiction is really stunning. And I'm sure we could go back to them and consider that point in the discussion. So notice, by the way, that these realizations are not drafts. So we can imagine people have been practicing somehow and then realize a final piece in a cave. We can find art basically all the way to the origin of Homo sapiens. Another point I wanted to emphasize here. So at the moment, we have proof of early rock art, at least 100,000 years ago. Visual examples are more recent, but still 40 to 50,000 years ago now. We keep finding older and older examples. When I was young, I think the oldest was maybe Alaska 25,000 years ago, and now we have found similar quality all the way to 40,000. And these visual depictions appear very early with the rise of Homo sapiens, and much later they evolve, or we evolve in our ideas and practices, and we can see an evolution from patterns, more abstract. We can imagine humans playing with the idea of visual depictions, and eventually this leads to the origins of writing. So I see visual art as a source of, in particular, writing, which later leads to arithmetics and then the sciences. So for me, art I see as if you want, from a scientific perspective, as one of these very important human trait that makes us special in nature, together with tool making and language. So, in fact, the evolution of art practices can be linked closely to the evolution of our tools. If you think back of rock art, we had to create tools to leave these traces, as an example. So let me say now more a little bit about the topic of intelligence. By the way, I think there's a lot more to say about how I try to pitch the importance of art here, but let's leave that for the discussion. So intelligence, in particular, I will emphasize that I'm interested in those aspects of intelligence that makes us different from other species. But I want to give you a reference or a basis, and I, in particular, discovered and it resonated with me, a particular paper written by the late Daniel Dennett together with Michael Levin. Michael Levin being a biologist and mathematician, and Daniel Dennett, a well-known philosopher, especially focusing on the philosophy of mind. And in there, we have a definition of cognitive horizon. And I take that literally as a basis for understanding, or at least having discussions about what we may mean by intelligence. I emphasize here some aspects of what's written by Dennett and Levin, but represent as memories, anticipate, decision, attempt to act or effect. It's from their perspective, and this relates to discussions on AI these days, they consider that this viewpoint is applicable to all cognitive systems in animals, at the level of cells even, and even probably we can apply it to synthetic life forms. There are two main aspects to this notion of cognitive horizon, or two main, let's say, dimensions. One is the spatial extent, essentially captured by the idea of how far an agent can sense and exert actions. And the other aspect is the time extent, and this goes in two ways. It relates to memory, what capacity a species may have for memory, but also what capacity a species may have for anticipation, thinking forward, what may happen in the future. Now, cognitive horizon, when we consider what Dennett and Levin are telling us, it implies that there is a body. This relates in particular to the notion of action that's emphasized in this definition of cognitive horizon. So we need the body to sense and to act. It is, I would argue, the main form of intelligence that we consider in robotics. It's almost explicitly the case. And I would argue that this is also the form of intelligence which we consider in the, let's say, field of artificial intelligence. And again, this is one of the discussion points we could consider later. Now, this very generic basis for defining what intelligence is, um, again, is applicable to any species. And it doesn't really emphasize what makes humans different. And this is where I want to focus. And that's the goal or the sort of focus of my long-term research project I refer to as AIM. So what makes us different? I want to emphasize these first three aspects. I've already talked about art. There's a number of reasons why I think this is critical for intelligence in humans. And clearly, it is uniquely developed in humans. There are some examples in other species, such as birds, of designing sort of little architecture and patterns, but it's very limited in any other species we've encountered. In humans, it's at a different level of complexity and ambition. The other topic I think makes humans specific is this idea of machines. And by machines, I mean all the way back to the original tools that we first created and through times evolved towards machines, tools with engines, with some dynamics, and eventually this continues to evolve through computers and robots. And all along the way, I would also emphasize that this is clearly influenced and used by the world of art, another maybe topic of discussion. Language also I see as unique to humans. I don't think this is surprising. Now, together, they give us a fourth aspect that is unique to humans, I would argue for. And this is maybe the crucial point is that with these three capacities unique to humans, then we have the possibility of archiving knowledge and passing it from generations to generations. And this allows us to continuously increase our cognitive horizon. So if we look back at the aspects of spatial extent and time extent, this is what makes us really particular. So, but what about AI in all this? Since I'm coming from the world of computer science and engineering in general, I see AI for me as a way of studying and understanding human intelligence. Hence, you'll understand why I think art should play a role in studies of AI. I also think that AI can be very useful in extending our cognitive horizon, if you want. Of course, AI is also relevant to the study of intelligence in other species. That would be another big topic to consider another time, maybe. So this was my motivation, the first part. And now I want to cover some of the research I've been conducting over the years in collaboration with artists, and usually artists who are friendly to the science or technologies and come to us with already having some background, for example, in programming. So I've had a number of such collaborations in the past with sculptors, with painters, etc. But I'm going to emphasize two particular ones. And this will also give you sort of an idea of how things have evolved through time since I joined Goldsmiths in particular. I met French artist Patrick Tresset when I arrived at Goldsmiths, actually, all the way back to late 2004. Patrick at the time was questioning his art practice and had decided to take a master's degree with us, a master's degree I had initiated when I arrived called Arts Computing. And initially, we engaged in a first project where we tried to study one of his artistic interests, which was portraiture. After a few years, and there'd be a history to go through, but I won't spend time on that right now. Patrick came back and engaged in the beginning of a PhD, and this is an example of one of the results, which was a first robotic system doing portraiture that you see in the image. Initially, the project was called ICON, the automated iconograph, sometimes also called the artistic iconograph. Later, Patrick created a new practice, and these robots were initially called Paul the Robot, and there's a series of them if you're interested. During our early discussions, we eventually reached a point where we thought of a system-based approach to try to understand how does Patrick, the artist, goes about thinking about, deciding on a plan, and realizing a portrait of someone. And here you have sort of very coarse level, not going in too many details, overview of the main processes or some of the main aspects that we thought the human artist needs to consider. So you have, of course, some kind of subject, a person, or it could be the image of a person, could be a photo. You have ideas of what are the main elements of faces that an artist might consider. You have issues of visual perception, limitations. You're using your body. So an artist becomes skillful in certain types of actions that allow them to develop particular skills and particular style. So we have to consider motor planning. Here we had put ideas of schemata, which comes from perception field. There's a notion of memory. Here we call that experience. And you see all kinds of arrows. So we were trying to emphasize that these different features are not independent, but are connected in some ways. And this is really, let's say, a creative type of diagram, not necessarily very accurate. So after considering these ideas, we first developed a software-based approach to portraiture based on such thinking. And after a few years, and when Patrick came back to start a PhD, so this was around 2009 or so, we realized that we were very limited in the stylistic signature of what we could do with a computer in a purely digital way. And we decided to explore a actual implementation through some robotic contraption. And here you see the first example of such a robot that was successfully able to do some version of a portrait. And it was presented at the art show, Kinetica Art Fair in London back in 2010. So the robot itself is a simple arm, and it has a camera eye which can move and look for faces, and then can focus on the drawing itself. So here's another version of that robotic system presented a year later. I'll let the video run. This is accelerated. So these portraiture scenarios would take about 20 minutes or so. It depends, of course, on the person features. If you have a beard, for example, it will take longer, etc. It's focused on areas of shadows and densities. We've published a few papers, so if you're interested in the sort of detail, more technical details, I can give you references later on how this was done back then. But at the time, this kind of work was seen as a breakthrough. It has a lot of success in art fairs and in computer science, sort of computer graphics type conferences. And it even ended up being acquired by some museum galleries, etc. So, for example, from that period, there is one of the portraits was acquired by Victoria and Albert Museum in London. The Victoria and Albert Museum is particularly interesting because they've been building a collection of computer art that goes back all the way to the 1960s. And they are one of the major museums that started early, has had this interest for a long time. So we were quite fortunate to be considered by them. So here's another example. So Patrick eventually left us in 2013 because his practice became extremely successful. And he really decided, okay, I'm going to go back to my art practice full time. But he continued to do research inspired by some of the issues we had considered together. And here you have an example of collaboration between human and machine. And this is using one of the popular neural network-based system of the time in around 2018, 2019, Pix2Pix. So basically, when we parted our ways in 2013, we had started to look at the impact of visual feedback, how visual feedback influence what the human artist is doing. So again, you start with this idea, you have someone in front of you, you're drawing them, but you're also influenced by the drawing itself. So this idea of feedback we wanted to explore, and I wanted to show you this example by Patrick a bit later in time, where he's pushing this agenda further. And I think there's a lot more there to explore in terms of feedbacks, not only visual. I'll come back to that later. So again, yes, in 2013, Patrick was still working with us. We have a paper on that period, which is our first paper, which integrates some notion of visual feedback. And again, I can give you a reference, or you just Google us, you search us, Tresset and Leymarie 2013. There's an excellent website for Patrick Tresset where he documents many of his systems and many of his art fairs and art galleries presentations. I invite you to visit it later. Maybe a year or two later, I was fortunate to meet another artist, which I would call an artist/scientist or technologist, like Patrick Tresset, Daniel Berriot. I mentioned him before. So Daniel came from a different type of art practice. It's the art practice of graffiti art or street art. He had noticed the work we had done with Patrick, and he got interested in the work we do, and he decided to join us. And he started a bit later a PhD. Now, because of his background in graffiti art, and because I was interested in looking at other aspects that we could study with artists, we decided to focus on the importance of movement. In graffiti art, you can imagine that good graffiti artists, people who've practiced a lot, are very rapid in their execution. And this shows in the traces that they will put on a wall, for example. So we thought this will be a good conjunction of having an artist expert in such art practice and focusing from a scientific perspective on the importance of movement. We had looked at research, past research, and in particular in the fields of neuroscience and psychology of perception, visual perception. Since about at least the 1990s, it became apparent that movement has an impact on aesthetics. And by that, I mean our appreciation of a artistic outcome. From neuroscience, we had noticed that movement seems to be recoverable by the observer. So what do I mean by that? If you consider, for example, here a simple calligraphic piece, and if you ask people what they think of this, how was it made in particular, you will come with descriptions that are very similar. And further, so this would be sort of the outcome of a psychology type experiment. You ask people what they see. You may guide them a little bit and say, how was it made? Or how do you think this was made? And you notice similarities that are obvious. If you look at the publications in neuroscience, what they tell you is that actually they've noticed that when observers face such artistic outcomes, their neural system reacts in very interesting ways. So in particular, the motor areas in your brain start to get really excited. So this is work which relate to the notion of mirror neurons. So it's essentially the idea that in our nervous system, we're able to duplicate actions, duplicate what is maybe happening in the outside world. So here you have to imagine that when you look at this piece without being really conscious of it, part of your brain, which relates to the brain that controls your movement, such as the movement of your arms, is lighting up, is getting really excited. So this is seen as evidence that we are trying to imagine how was this done. And the neuroscientists and the psychologists go further and argue that we can even qualify how it was done, and this perhaps influence our opinion on the traces that have been laid out. So this is how it could be the origin or the source of a theory of aesthetics, or at least play a role here. So given this type of research, we got really excited and we thought we're on perhaps on an interesting track, and we should go down that route and explore it further. We established a number of collaborations that I wanted to emphasize here, in particular with Constance University, who had a similar activity since the late 2000s. They've been focusing more on painting. We were focusing on drawing with Patrick, and then later on calligraphy and graffiti art. With EDIAP, we started a collaboration in robotics and machine learning. This is with Dr. Sylvain Calinon, which has had a big impact on our work. And Calinon is also an expert of aspects of motor control and dynamics for robotics. So we thought that this would be useful to be involved with such an expert. In Polytechnique, you have Professor Plamondon, and he's one of the pioneers of a new field of research which emerged in the late 1970s, early 80s, called graphonomics. And this is a particular field of research where people got interested in studying human signature initially. So if you go back in time, in those days, signatures were very important. People were using signatures to identify themselves. You can think of banknotes, for example. So there was a lot of interest in capturing what makes a signature unique to you. And out of this field, after many years, let's say from the 1990s or so, emerged a few interesting mathematical models of how humans sign, and I'll come back to that in a moment. In Leuven, we established initially a collaboration in psychology. Professor Wagemans, an expert of shape perception and studying art, visually speaking. And there was also a period where we worked with people at LOB Research, and this was more about focusing on characters and fonts and the notion of shape of fonts. I'll say a little more about that later. So, given these types of influences and these different domains, we dived into the research proper, and we started to look at how could we reproduce the dynamics of movement and the quality of good art in calligraphy or graffiti with first digital approaches, software-based implementations, and eventually with robotic systems. If you're interested in details, it goes into all these disciplines. I recommend the thesis of Daniel Berriot. This is the cover, and I can give you links. It's available as a digital version. So I mentioned Professor Plamondon and the world of graphonomics. So this is the type of mathematical model. This will be one of maybe the only equation I'll show you today. And this is what we call a sigma log normal type of function. And you have some graphical versions of what this function can look like. It tends to be very much like a bell shape type of approach, but it's asymmetric compared to a Gaussian. Don't worry too much about the equation. It has many parameters, essentially, I want to emphasize. So in the use of such a function, we will need to have ways to identify these parameters. And this type of function is good at capturing movement of humans. And Professor Plamondon and collaborators have shown that it's especially good for rapid movements. And the idea here is that if you consider, again, a graffiti artist, in their practice, they use rapid movements. If you think of signature, what makes your signature unique, you do it without thinking. It's flowing, it's rapid. So this type of equation actually captures the movement aspect. So the acceleration, you start from zero speed, you accelerate, you decelerate. This is where this type of approach is useful. And here's an illustration of what I mean here. So you have on the left-hand side those red lines. They're joining three targets, a starting point, an intermediate target, and a final goal. And you have three different traces in black. And they have the same targets. What you see in the middle is the use of these log normal functions, which capture the movement aspect. So you start from zero speed, you accelerate to a maximum speed, and then you decelerate, perhaps, accelerate again, decelerate. And you see that in the first one, we start from zero, we accelerate to a maximum speed, we decelerate, and we reach zero again. And then we do a second part of the movement, very similar. And if you look at the trace, you see that we're able to reach the intermediate target. And this is the only way you'll be able to reach sorry, I have my cat here bothering me. This is the only way you'll be able to reach a corner. And you can show that, in fact, even if you're moving really fast, if you want to draw a sharp corner, even if it's very brief, you'll have to stop there and then start again. So this is to illustrate how this type of characterization of human movement correspond to the actual actions. And then what happens is if you start playing with these movement captures by targets, you can generate all kinds of intermediate traces where you start playing with the aspect of speed. So as you don't let yourself to go draw a corner, you can have very smooth movements still guided by the intermediate target, and you can capture all these differences by acting in the movement space. And on the right-hand side, you have a more complicated set of targets and what we would call a tag in graffiti art. And under it, you see the sequence of log normals which capture the kinematics of your movement. So we have now we think a very good model for the kinematics of drawings by experts. And here's an illustration on the digital side. And what is also very interesting here is that we are able to capture variations given the same plan, the same ideas. You're trying to here to do a calligraphy-like rendition of the letter M. But if you consider a human artist or a human even non-artist, and they're writing or drawing the same letter with the same plan in their head, they'll never do exactly the same drawing. And we show here that this type of variation seems to be well captured by acting in the kinematic space rather than acting in the geometric space. What do I mean by that? Here's an illustration. So at the bottom, you have a typical Bezier, which is a spline geometric approach, and trying to capture variations by playing on randomization of parameters of these splines. But at the top, you have the log normal. And here, I'll maybe play it again so that you can notice the difference better. The randomization is in the kinematic space. And you can observe that the rendition is much more like what a human would do under variations. Right, so the main point here is that we can perhaps capture well human variations by considering the kinematic space rather than geometric space, which has been the traditional approach. Now, beside movement, we also studied aspects of shape. So we had to have some ideas of where are the targets? When we imagine a letter or we look at a picture and we want to start drawing some of these nice curves, we have to extract these targets. These targets are not necessarily points we want to go through, but they're guiding our movements. So we've done some work on those aspects, and here is a brief slide to give you some insight of inspiration, what type of approach we've looked at from the past. So in particular, we emphasize work by Harry Blum, which a long time ago proposed a geometric approach to study shapes in biology. And I think this is very interesting. If you're not familiar with this work, I can refer to some of the main publications by Harry Blum, in particular, a very important thesis that he published in the Journal of Theoretical Biology in 1973. So essentially, he develops this idea that you can think of shapes as being dynamic in the sense that any contour of an object generates waveforms around it, and these waves collapse and creates what we call symmetry axis. And you have some illustration here. These symmetry axes have all kinds of properties, but in particular, they point to these corners, or they will indicate where you have nice curvatures that take special values. I could go on and on this topic. It's been explored in depth. And again, if you're interested, let me know. Another important idea came from a psychologist, mathematician Michael Layton from the 1980s, this idea of symmetry, curvature, duality. And he had a notion, the idea that these symmetry axes could be thought of in terms of deformation. So if you think of a shape that is deforming, changing its outline over time, you can think of these symmetry axes as being carriers of or indicators of forces, forces which may push outward the shape to deform, or forces that come from the environment from outside and push inward. Inspired by these ideas that were formalized in mathematical ways, we were able to propose a sort of variation on these ideas we call the curvilinear shape features. And this has proven to be a very good way to get for us automatically a number of good targets. We have some publication on that. So again, I can refer you to these aspects. So once we have these targets, we can start thinking in terms of where are they on a shape and what kind of then a log normal we might use to create our own version here, for example, of a letter B. There are other mathematical objects such as Euler spirals that are used. These are used mainly to find when you have so-called inflection points, or where the curvature goes from convex to concave. And again, once you have all these elements together, you can now take, for example, this calligraphic trace from a database and propose some targets that you see as red points here, and an initial plan linking these targets, the dotted red dots. But then going into the kinematic space, you can create all kinds of variations, and the idea is that these variations are very similar to what the human artist will do on the repetition. So by that time, we thought, okay, now we have a very good grasp, or we think we have a very good grasp of the modeling aspect. So if you think back of the work with Patrick Tresse, we had also gone through some modeling and some digital attempt, and then we moved to robotics. So here's the same idea. We have now a good grasp of our modeling. We're going to demonstrate it through robotics. In robotics, you always first test your approach with simulations. Here's an illustration of that. You don't want to break the robot, basically. That's the main reason to do simulations. And this is early work in that context that we did with Dr. Calinon at EDAP in Switzerland. So we use one of his robots. It's a humanoid robot from, let's say, the 1 or 2 generations ago. These robots are interesting because they can be used in the vicinity of humans. They are so-called compliant robots. They're not the type of robot you see in typically in industry, where you have to put protection around and the robot is very efficient, always doing the same movement. So these robots, if they encounter an obstacle, they will stop, for example. So that's useful in collaborative work with humans. They have their own constraints and difficulties. Because they're not rigid, the control of it is much harder. And you can think of the human. So if you look at this particular research, there's a paper published at the robotics conference in 2016, I believe, IROS, one of the main robotics conference. You'll see that one of the challenges on the technical side is how do you refine the movements? And for us, it would be what kind of parameters do we need to refine in our kinematic space so that the robot does good traces. Number of publications have followed. Some look at neural networks, combining with neural networks here, an RNN approach, which tries to have aspects of memory modeled. So this is early works, lots more to do. I wanted just to list here, it's not important, I can share the slides, I don't have to read all this, but you see works which involves people in mathematics, people in psychology, people in the arts. This is how we explore this domain. I will end the talk with the most recent work, or some of the most recent work, that we've published at SIGGRAPH Asia back in December. So here we're exploring more the combination of modern AI tech with the way we think about realizing calligraphic traces, again, with a good control in the kinematic space and notions of shape. So we've shown in particular that we could use some of the generative type architectures that have been proposed recently and combine them with our models of curves. If you look at the technical detail, you'll see that there's here an argument for using B-splines. So for the expert in the room, a lot of work has been using Bezier for splines in this context, but we propose that we can actually use B-splines. B-splines allow you to think in terms of very long curves, as long as you want. While Bezier are short curves that you have to connect somehow, so they have their own difficulties. We can, because now we're so this is a part of the work I would say that is more creative, and we're trying to push the what can be done with our ideas that we've developed. So it's not purely about modeling the humans anymore. It's about combining what AI can do for us with traditional practices. And here you have an influence of photos, different starting points, different patterns. You see 3 examples. And then we find targets, we refine the traces, and because we start with very different inputs, we end up with 3 different renditions from the same image. And eventually we can render it with our robots. And the robot is a bit of proof of in the pudding, because you have to show that you can actually move the robot in a good way so that the traces can be rendered and look natural. So, there's no hesitation. The robot is not vibrating. The robot is doing nice movements like a human would do. So here's an illustration of the process, how it gets refined from a given pattern and eventually moves to the robotic system. This is a robot in our lab. It's called the Franka from Germany company, Franka Robotics. It's the kind of robot you see in a lot of research labs. You see in the details below, we've also linked or explored this type of approach with architectures such as CLIP. So essentially, then you have a multi-model input. So you can also combine this work with prompts and text, as other people do in generative AI. And then you can expand, okay, what else can we do with these ideas? And here are some examples. I want to emphasize, again, collaborations. In recent last few years, we've been involved in driving a big project together with Professor Deussen, I mentioned before, from Constance. You have an example of a painting, sort of self-portrait by their robot on the top left. And it involves other artists. We've collaborated again with Patrick Tresset. You see some example at the top. Here's the lab in Constance. They focused again. So we focused mostly so far on drawing type of approaches, calligraphy, portraiture, and they focused during the same period, since about the late 2000s until now, on painting. So they have lots of experience on that side. And we've been collaborating in the last 10 years or so, exchanging ideas. And here, more concretely, in this project we call EAGVA. There are other people involved. So you have people like Dr. Chamberlain, who's a psychologist, to focus on vision and art. Artists like Liad Greva. A selection of artists were selected for this project, including Patrick Tresset, Licia He, who's a Chinese-Canadian artist now in Japan, Greta Lu, based in Germany, Anna Merkin, Russian, based in Germany, and they all have different practices. Look them up. You have the website at the bottom, eagva.org, and they've been involved in exploring robotics and AI in our two labs, and each of them really goes in different directions. That's very interesting with the work we do. Other people involved cover aspects of psychology, philosophy. So my final words. Where do we go first? Where are we going next with this kind of agenda, the AIM agenda? I'm establishing new collaborations in the world of haptics, so with experts in sense of touch and proprioception, which is how you have feelings within your body when you act and you, for example, you have a pen and you touch a surface. It's not just at the tip that you have sensations, but it's through your body. So we're establishing some new work with experts in those fields. And of course, in terms of feedback, this is an important aspect of what the human artistic experiences. It's not just visual, it's also by feeling the surface, it's also the feelings you get from the brush, etc. So we want to go in that direction and see what is possible given all the research done in these areas so far. And of course, we continue to work with different fields, different experts, and we're happy to work with other people if interested. And a final slide, just to summarize. In AIM, we're addressing this particular notion of intelligence based on the cognitive horizon definition proposed in particular, but not only by Bennett and Levin. It emphasizes the body. It expresses intelligence through action, and there are some interesting philosophical take on that, why this might be the case. And I think very importantly, if we think of what is special about the humans, it is our main way to externalize our thoughts. And if you think of children, how they evolve in their early years and their urge to do drawings, for example, I think it's largely because they are experimenting with this idea of externalizing your thoughts. I thank you, and I think we've reached the discussion time.
Thank you very much. This is great. Thank you. Zoom clapping doesn't work, so I think we're all we're happy about it. So yeah, this is very, very exciting. As I said, my PhD is in art history, so I may be the more inclined here in a sense. But I ask everybody to sort of like raise their hand. I see Mar. So Mar, just take it away.
Hello,
Hello.
Ma.
Hello. Yeah, great talk. And very interesting to listen everything. I mean, some things again, but some things new. About the latest research that you're doing, I mean, I mean, one of our art was this dream painter. We use also this the famous diff BG library, the differential
Yeah.
rasterization. But like this library is magic to do things, but it seems like a little bit obsolete, no? It's just like everyone is based on this library, many things, but no one gets over. And uh, I think the last push is 4 years ago. I don't know, like
Yeah, it's a, as far as I
um,
understand it, it was a PhD work at MIT.
yes.
And
But
then,
I don't know if you compile it. I did compile it many times in different computers to run my project, and is a pain in the ass. I have one. Sorry. Uh, I have one collab that runs really easy. But every time I need to install in some Ubuntu or something, well, but I want to say like yeah, I mean, it's fascinating this idea of like the kinetics variations. I kind of got it in the paper, but now you explain it, and even I mean, I read it in December after we met in China. Um, yeah, I think is a very fascinating thing. How to think about variations, because yeah, it's definitely true that I was actually when you were explaining, I was thinking how you deal, because you say about the simulations. I'm not so good on simulating, but I know, for example, especially in high torque robots like KUKA, which we used at the beginning for Dream Painter, um, the instructions and reality is different. If you make a line straight of 1 meter,
mhm.
um, even if you decelerate, um, well, because there is a path planners inside these robots, at least in some of them, like KUKA. Even if you decelerate, you need to put points. You need to put progressively
Mm.
points near to the edge to kind of because otherwise, what we'll do is actually we'll go like if you make a perfect square, like the squares will have spikes. I mean, I'm just saying that I'm noticing in some of the robots, they one thing is what you send, and the other is what they
Oh, yeah.
do. And also it has to do exactly also what you said about the motion, because like a 200 kilos industrial robotic arm, you will not stop unless you go very slow,
Yes.
or
Yeah,
unless
there are
there
also
is
all kinds
a
of issues.
curve.
Yeah. And this is, I mean, that's the world of robotics, and it
Yeah.
varies not only by companies, but even within a given company, they keep releasing new versions. But
Yes, yes, but there is I mean, there
there's
is lot of
the body of the
physics,
robot is,
internals, black boxes of these robots, and 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 anyway, this fascinating. But actually, it has to do also with what you were saying about the motion, because there they deal with motion in many different aspects. And at the end, what I notice is that even I do things to mitigate, then even they say the precision is 0.01. That is if you do certain things.
yes.
If you do certain others, then they produce variations themselves also because of the I don't know, many
Yeah.
aspects that of the black box. And
Yeah.
anyway, it, very interesting.
I think that, that for those who are involved in robotics, it's interesting to think to make the relation with the human body, because your robotic system, if you think of your body as a robot type of approach, you're made of, millions, trillions of cells. And if you think of your muscles, they're assemblies of lots of cells. So you you have this flexibility that is not the same as typically is designed in these robots. These robots have very few parts, and they are not necessarily designed initially for the type of movements we're trying to do here.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
a robot like the Franca, again, it has it's a bit more agreeable to work with, and you see more now robots that have this sort of flexibility in their control coming out. So the world of robotics is changing fast. But industrial robots from recent times, yeah, it's a completely different game. But and
Mm.
if you have you mentioned the way or the mass of a particular robot. Of course, that plays a role. Imagine your body was a ton and you're moving,
Yeah.
you have to stop, and you'd have
Yes.
you'd have similar constraints. So um, I find it since the day I really started to go into robotics with Patrick Tresset. So it was great that he pushed us this way. But uh, having many years just doing digital things, and then realizing that when you work with machines, you have all these new issues that show up that are not present if you're just doing programming or
Mm,
mathematics for programming.
mm.
You can do mathematics for robotic for hard, for concrete things, and so that you can the mathematics is not necessarily a problem, but if you do just digital, you're avoiding a lot of issues. So part of my aim proposal here is to emphasize that. So thank you for these points, because I think I maybe didn't really emphasize as much as it should why the going from the digital or AI only today, we would say, world to the robotics is important.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very much. Um, Maybe we should sort of go around. Like let me ask my own first question, which basically I'm going from the end to the beginning. Um, I had to smile when you brought up the log normal thing because my own signature is a burst of log normals, um, where something very like I never thought about it like this, but like there's since you brought this up, it occurred to me that sort of like what I'm doing here is I have to zone myself into sign because it's a very, very quick burst of gesture. There's a very particular rhythm, and then I have to always evaluate if it looks like I want it to look like. And so I have this signature, which I don't know, developed sort of when I was 15. So since 36, 37 years. And every single time, like if for example, if you have to sign on a UPS touch screen with a finger, it just doesn't work. I cannot do it. I need a pen, and there's quite some energy in there. It's like da 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 dum da dum.
Mhm.
Okay, and so that is there. There's sort of like even I have a hard time copying my signature. So probably it's really hard to sort of like fake this in a sense. And I usually recognize if somebody else tried it. And so one of the weird things here, though, is that in addition to the log normal, and there is clearly a target, and it's very much like you said, there's like a corner target, but I smooth some out and so on. There's this other thing, which is there's clearly a score, which is sort of like if you have your target sort of as a pattern. But then there is this rhythm thing, which I think there's one thing your robots don't have. Like if you have a B-spline that's long, like you can move from target to target, but there is the robot has these actuators or servos, right? You can follow this thing, but there is something else happening. It's da 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 dun, and then I have two lines I have to sort of like get an onset, and there is clearly something happening in my muscles as I'm
Mhm.
sewn in. They get attention, and sort of this is like, and I hate to bring this up, but like I know everybody around me is annoyed by skiing metaphors. This is like freestyle skiing or dancing, or in drawing. I think they're very related, and so the question is, do you think that that's sort of something you can bring in? Because it strikes me as something, if you think about like these related things of rhyme and hip hop versus graffiti, like Dilla time, it's sort of like in some sense the most sophisticated way we deal with time in spoken or sung word, and in music in general, since basically Chauvet Cave, is in this area, and there is a lot of sophistication going on in there, and it seems to me that if you look at anything that is robotic, electronic music sequencers and stuff like that, they're just they don't do the same thing a good DJ can do with their hands. or a good hip hop rhyme.
Yeah. Mhm.
So do you think there are certain dimensions which we need to bring in, which currently the robots don't do because they don't have elastic muscles, and so on?
Uh, well, thanks first for the discussion because I think you're going in a few directions here, but um, the world of sound and how it relates to movement. Again, there are similar research showing you listen to something and motor areas of your brain show light up as well. So, and I think everybody has this idea that rhythm is we will move with it. So there are these connections there that I think are interesting to bring in later. I mean, it's not an area where I work, but um, and then the robotic side. Well, basically we work with what we have access to, so we're quite limited, of course. And then so if you look at Professor Plamondon, for example, the one of the main person pushing for this particular way of modeling rapid movements. If you look at his research over time, he's looking at applications in health, for example, medicine or things like that. So trembling movement. So relating when do you go from these smooth, rapid movement to something where you start having all kinds of either defects or other kinds of rhythm, and then basically how does the mathematical model move away? It breaks down. So you can use it. In our case, we're using it to try to control the robot, but you can use it also to analyze how you how the movement goes away from something like a smooth set of log normals. Um, but if I understood the topic of the question is basically what can we do with robotics today? So there is an area emerging in robots for a number of years, but I think it's really picking up speed now. It's called soft robotics, and they have this concern. They understand that the robots so far are very limited in comparison to animal bodies by their design and their construction, and they're trying to design robots which are more similar to assemblies of cells and muscles and things like that. Um, it's not, I haven't worked with these, but the people I'm establishing collaboration in haptics, they come from that world, so they have that knowledge of where are we so far. What I've noticed is that I don't think we're very far. It seems to be very challenging from an engineering point of view to design anything flexible like muscles.
Mhm.
So, we I would, but there is definitely work going in that direction by lots of people. So we could imagine that we could address these issues in a few years more interestingly with state-of-the-art. But
There's a, I think this sort of like if we stay sort of on the in the conceptual realm, like
yes,
yes, we will have soft robots and
maybe. I
octopus
mean, I don't know when, but
octopus tentacles and whatever. But I think we could actually even do right now, right? Like think about this. Like if you look at your variations,
mhm,
they very much sort of remind of like attractors in chaos theory, like the Chua circuit and stuff like that,
mhm,
Lorentz attractors, where you go the same path, but you have these slight little deviations, which
yeah,
if you follow sort of Chua and Mainzer, then they call this a local activity principle. And so in some sense, you could ask yourself, like in this variation, like, hey, what is the rules? Which is like obviously you provide a lot of answers here, like for example, this kinetic target. But then the opposite, like the inverse question would be, what is actually the sources of local activity in this process? And so, for example, if you realize, okay, so you can't have sort of microscopic muscle tensions, and standing wrong and whatever, like because you have to sort of like hold something under your arm and your phone with like this, and then like you try to decide. So that is not something you can sort of like soft robotics mimic, but you could totally introduce sources of local activity in the process, like just random number generator somewhere, that actually sort of would bring that in and get your sort of like more mechanic robots closer to this kind of thing, which sort of like gives us this whole question, like, can we make this a complexity science? Like, can we study the variation in drawing and then sort of bring that into something in the synthesis space where we could, similar, again, similar as in music, where we sort of use sine waves to sort of like mimic any sound, and any additive synthesizer is not what we sort of synthesize, but we can make it sound anything we want to have. So the question is, can we draw anything that we want to draw in the same way we do additive synthesis in music, basically?
Yes. It's a good research topic. I think here we have some elements to explore that, as you mentioned. Thinking of Calinon's work, I know he's hot on ergodic systems, so approach. So I know that he's looked at our work and commented that we could approach it from that perspective, for example. So I think this is an open area of research, and I think what you elaborated there is definitely interesting. So, for example, the human artist or the human in general, you practice an activity and you get to a level where you're satisfied with it, like your signature, let's say, and then you repeat it. We have this idea that it's not rigid control, so it never looks exactly the same, but you've reached some kind of optimum in some way. There's this notion of you're satisfied with it. What you were mentioning, that's what it makes me think of. Could we have some way of characterizing this sort of notion of optimum, or could we compare one person with another, whether they have different ways of reaching a place where you have complexity because you never do exactly the same, but at the same time, there's notion of repetition. You recognize this idea of style. You recognize, oh, that's the signature of that person. They do it in a particular way. It's never the same, never exactly the same, but it is the same in a way. How can you say that it is the same? I think that could be one way of approaching this question, and it relates for me to this open area of what do we mean by the style of someone? What is it? What is it about style in drawing? Which it's an open issue at this point. Another thing I wanted to mention here, because I'm not sure in the talk I really emphasized that, is this idea that you look at the traces and it lights up notions of movement in your nervous system. So there are other finer distinction there. So anyone will have normally this unless maybe you have a problem with your nervous system, but normally everybody will have this effect. So we all go, or many, if you go to a museum or a gallery, you can imagine you have these effects on you, whether you're let's say an expert in the art, or whether you're a practicing artist, or whether you're let's say a naive observer, which is most people. So this is part of us, which is another interesting aspect. Is even if it's not an activity that you're involved in, at least since early age, these effects are part of you. So they play they have a fundamental role to play, and that's so again, for me that's important. It means it is important, and let's try to understand exactly how it happens. Um, but also, so the naive observer, whether you're a naive observer or non-expert versus expert, we all have these effects. So that's something I maybe didn't emphasize. We should recognize, and then the expert. So the expert can say. So this is more from psychology now. The expert can really go deeper and in characterizing what they're seeing, and they can, if they know well another artist's style, they can be good at telling you, oh, this is from this person versus this is from this person. While the naive observer will not be able to do that. And again, how is this possible? So in our type of work, we would say, at least it seems one measure that could be used is this um, reconstruction of the kinematics.
Yeah, very, very, very super interesting. I give it over to Mike. Just use your microphone, and I will pin your view, and then I think you will see you.
Mute. Can you hear me now?
You switch on your speaker.
I can hear, yes.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, Mike, yes.
Yeah, but we cannot hear you. Just a moment.
What
We'll
do you want
fix
me to,
this.
I can turn off my,
Max?
Yeah.
Have.
Do you have your speaker on?
Okay, I can. But now,
Sorry. Let me do it. Okay. Let me do it. Can you just, you want to come over or just speak louder?
I can.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. We're gonna switch places.
yeah, no problem.
Okay, let's get back to. I hope it works now. Can you say
Yes.
something just to check that we have?
Oh, wait.
Thank you, by the way, for getting in touch.
Yeah. So thank you so much. It was very, very interesting. And actually, I have series of questions, and I guess we decided to go around it. So I will start with the probably the most interesting one, which is once again around this kinematic view of calligraphy signatures, etc. In fact, I think we a couple of months ago we had Olivier Marron talking at the seminar, and he was talking in particular about classification of sort of alphabets and other similar sign systems. And he was interested, for example, in zip flow for sign systems, meaning that more simple signs are more common and more complex signs are less common. And the question is how you define the complexity of a sign. And when we discussed with him after his talk, exactly this topic came through, because whether we should look at the sign as a static collection of symbols or sort of lines and dots on a piece of paper, or whether we should think of it as a result of a movement of a hand. And and back then he said that he indeed admits that it is a problem, but he doesn't know how to do it in a kinetic way. And actually, I think that there is a very interesting sort of correspondence, and that what you are showing is exactly what we lacked back then when we were discussing. However, just now, Max, when he described his experience of signing his signature, he said a very interesting thing, that in the end he still has to look at it and check whether the result is satisfactory.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that it is not completely sort of our reconstruction of what we see and our assessment of what we see is not just kinetic reconstruction. We can get to the point when the picture visually is too bad, and even though we know that it is produced by some variation of a given set of these turn points and whatever, it is still unsatisfactory for us. So probably the way a person looks at so for example, handwritten text is both reconstructing this presumed set of turn points and reference points and looking at it as a picture. And my question is whether it is what is known about it from point of view of neuroscience, and whether it is possible to probe this sort of thing in computer vision. For example, maybe if we construct some sort of well, we do now have neural networks which are able to understand handwriting. Is it possible to find maybe in some hidden layers the point when they are looking indeed on these turn points?
Yes.
Have anybody done this?
I don't know, but I can see where you're going. The thing with engineering systems is that if you're not trying to integrate your understanding of the human, you can build systems which are obtaining a result, but are not necessarily like what the animal or the human is doing. So there can be many solutions to a problem like that. But going back to your examples, I would argue that even if you say, okay, you've done a number of traces yourself, so you've used movement, you know that, it's obvious, and you're using it in your style, meaning in a skillful way that you've practiced many times, you're doing movements that you've done over and over again, and yet you get a result, you had an idea, you've done it before, and you're not satisfied. But now you're looking at it. So the idea here is that you don't control that. You're looking at it. So therefore, one of the aspects that is influencing your perception of it is this association of a reconstructed movement. So even you've done it, but now you're looking at it.
Yeah, you're unable
The reconstruction of the kinematics is done unconsciously. You don't control that. So that reconstruction, it doesn't need to be exactly like the set of movements you've done. It should be, I guess, but this is going beyond my understanding of that, what we know about what the brain is doing. So I think it would still play a role, that you would still say, okay, I'm not happy with this. And part of the not happy could be perhaps still at least partly based on your sort of unconscious kinematic reconstruction. That would be the argument I was pushing for, that one aspect of aesthetics that seems to be important here is that when you see the traces, even in a painting, which is not the case of all paintings, or all parts of a painting, but when you see traces, you automatically are imagining how it was done. And this would play a role in the sort of aesthetic from the point of view of understanding the structure of what you're seeing and characterizing it. And beyond that, I would say this idea that aesthetic might be linked or can be thought of to be linked to pleasure. Why? I I could see that certain movements give us more pleasure than others. So again, that's why I find this idea that it links to a notion of aesthetics interesting here to approach it this way. But that doesn't mean, as you pointed out, that there are other dimensions and that picture as a whole. In my slides, I had a particular set of work which was about shape and how do you detail an existing patterns, this notion of symmetry axis, etc. So that can be another dimension that also comes into play. And maybe in some cases, one aspect as more important than another. So if I think of the writing of the letters or the fonts, a lot of the fonts nowadays are not calligraphy-like because people don't write anymore, right? So we use existing, and these fonts often have are built such that the notion of the kinematics is evacuated. So in particular, there's often very sharp corners and then very straight set of lines. So these then don't require a very constrained kinematics. The kinematics become constrained when there is curvature, basically, or occasional stop of curvatures. But if you have everywhere straight lines, corners, etc., like you have in a lot of fonts, then you could say maybe this at least this model would not perform because it almost all the values you could approach it with so many variations on the parameters with the same result. And then maybe the pattern recognition picture, sort of classic, more computational geometry thinking would be more important.
Yeah. So basically, well, first of all, of course, of course it is indeed a valid idea that computers can address the same problems in a different ways than we do, but nevertheless it probably makes sense to ask a question. For example, if you have a printed font, you have a sort of a neural network which is trained on distinguishing printed fonts and recognizing text from print, and another neural network which is trained at checking whether it is the signature of the same person or a different person. And probably it will be interesting to look into the hidden layers of them and check whether they are doing the same thing or different things, and whether you can recognize that one of them is doing things more sort of classical computer vision sort of way, and another has sort of a hidden kinetic dimension.
So I guess there you would want to run this experiment with the same architecture on both sides.
More
or as similar as possible, so that what happens in the layers, there is, otherwise if you have a very different architecture, it's going to be hard to conclude anything. Yeah, that would be interesting to do. Is that the kind of work you want to do, or
no, it just came to my mind while we were talking. And you want to follow up?
Yeah. So there's thank you. So there's a sort of very interesting sort of like seg to your feedback issue, right? Where you can ask yourself, like, what's the alignment and like what's the latency in that feedback? Because I think if you get to sort of like this joy issue, for example, somehow there is some kind of relationship that if you're sort of in the flow and whatever you do is what you anticipate and the environment reacts to you in exactly that way, which is obviously, you know, if you do graffiti on a wall, if there is no wind, then this is sort of like an artificial kind of like thing. But, you know, for example, in Japanese one-line drawing where the whole body is involved and the approach is dense, that may totally be the case. And so the thing that always sort of resonates with me is this sort of like, I think Alyssa Liu was the gold medalist in figure skating, this year, and there's sort of like for 70 seconds she does all the stuff that she has to do, like all the most crazy jumps that you can imagine, and then she makes it through there with sort of absolute perfect precision, like sort of like she hits all the your kinetic targets in a sense, and but she's so in sync that sort of the rest of the thing, everybody, even if you can't skate, can see that she's completely in the flow, and everything is, everything there's no latency between anticipation and performance and sort of whatever happens to her. And I don't know, it's like I personally can say, like, I had a similar experience one time skiing for 7 to 10 seconds, and I had the feeling that the whole universe sort of like evolved for this moment, but I cannot repeat it. And so there seems to be this kind of thing which is sort of like, the magic sauce of anticipation. It's somehow it's cognition, but is it computation? Good question, right? And so the key question is that sort of something which one can optimize for? Like, can we sort of like take serious your systems diagram, which you said, like, this icon first version actually sort of like painted shadows, which is obviously not, it's exactly not that, right? But sort of, can we build a feedback system that actually has that sort of like minimization of reaction time, trying to sort of like anticipate not only what itself will be producing, but also how the environment will sort of flow around it and sort of react to that in a kind of dynamic environment, which sort of is, I think, not just a kinetic function of drawing, but applies to many situations, like, a conversation. Like, if I ask a question that anticipates what you find interesting, and you see what I mean. So these kind of things sort of like can be maybe feed into a theory of kinetic interaction with the environment, which is very much embodied. So that's like I would be interested how you react to that, and then I have a follow-up question, which has to do with this. But let me not mention what this is. So could you see that, like, that this what you're doing goes way beyond drawing in a sense in terms of theory?
The last point, I would say yes. The intuition is that we focus on drawing and related activities, but that this is more general. Going back to the graphonomics, in that space, people are thinking that this applies to all kinds of movements that we do, like moving your tongue. And now the examples you have of this idea of flow, I like a lot. I haven't thought of it this way in terms of an experiment, but I would imagine that we have at least tools or a framework that could be explored in that type of experiment. Being in the flow and trying to optimize for no hesitation or as few as possible, or reacting to change in the environment in that context. So I could imagine, an interesting scenario where at least we have elements that could be tested. Whether they're sufficient, probably not. So, our body has so many dimensions by which we operate in terms of reacting to the world and feeling the inside. Do you need all that to have a successful experiment, or can you have a very elementary version? Would be interesting to do some experiments. I think if I think of people in dance, for example, who have started to work with existing robots, and I think they're interested in the aesthetics of the potential movements of these robots in relation to their own movement. That could be, I could imagine that in that context, you could probably have interesting experiment there. So that's what it evokes for me, and basically, at least we're at the 10 years ago, you asked me this, I'd probably say, wow, I have no idea how to approach this.
Mhm.
At least in our case, we have some interesting results and concepts.
Mhm, mhm. Then there's a thing which there's a similar extension of like sort of not going just in the domain of drawing, but um, you have this idea of human uniqueness from Michael Levin and Daniel Dennett.
Well, okay, not really. I mean, they actually are trying to pitch a concept of how to think of intelligence, which is universal
Yeah,
in terms of uh,
and, and
beings that agents that can act. But while I'm saying what I'm saying is because I'm thinking of the world of AI, and I find a lot of the discussion, a lot of the work is about activities that are general, that moving around obstacles, grabbing something, putting it there. This is sort of the universal side of intelligence. But I'm trying to pitch the idea that there's a lot to do and say about what is very specific to the humans only, as far as
Mhm.
we know. Um, and in a way, also, I'm pitching myself and saying I want to. Why do I focus only on this kind of activities? But why is it relevant?
Mhm.
So that's not. I just wanted to highlight that that's not. I think the focus of Dennett and maybe
Okay.
Dennett, but
Like,
I don't think Levin.
the thing I'm after is that why would we ask for like why would we want to engage in this game how humans are unique and special, which
Mhm.
this has a very old sort of like a whole story of like go and dominate the planet kind of from the Bible, right? The question is like if you turn it around, if you ask yourself a question, okay, so in how much is this just a gradient? Like yeah, we draw symbols and maybe other animals do not, but like maybe there's like you open a lot of aspects which you could sort of take out to the nature and basically other parts of nature other than us and actually see there's very similar things going on like the work of Thomas Wischig putting little backpacks on pigeons and you see them circling and that again looks like one of these attractors that they do the same thing but like sort of like they deviate but not too much and whatever and you could say oh yeah there's a stupid swarm theory all you need is a couple of parameters and it looks like sardines versus pigeons. But then, you see swifts sort of circling around your house and it awfully looks like they have fun, right? Obviously, they're also searching for food and there's an elegance in there and there's like beauty in there and there's this sort of like, they're sort of intelligent in being swifts. They may be bad humans and bad draughtsmen and bad bass soloists like Bootsy Collins. So there's no transfer of knowledge, and that is sort of like okay,
Yeah,
that's a
that's a key. Yeah.
but then okay, let's talk about animals where there is such a transfer of knowledge. So then the question again, it's like what I'm saying is like, isn't this maybe a gradient where you can actually see transfer of knowledge? Most of transfer of knowledge, including in humans, is probably one step, sometimes two steps, sometimes very long time, sometimes infinite impulse response. But so yeah, maybe we're at the sort of far end of the gradient, and in that sense, we are unique. But wouldn't it be interesting to see what is sort of like the ecology of that kind of things in nature, in a sense?
Oh yeah, yeah. So I've come across some work that shows that there's some species who have some beginning of similar potential, but it's so limited that the accumulation of knowledge is not really there, or it gets stuck rapidly and never really changes. And this is true of the other great apes. So they're I mean, if you think of the biology, very similar to us, but they're missing. It's like it doesn't seem it's. I mean, biologically, maybe it's a gradient. They're missing only I don't know, a few things in their nervous system. Therefore, in their encoding and maybe also in their social relations, but um, and their body. So one thing I didn't emphasize a lot is is the machine aspect in AIM. So we became so good at creating knowledge and passing it on through art. I would argue everything that I consider art, which includes symbols and creation, etc. So I'm not thinking of just art as of today, what we say is art, but all this is possible because we can manipulate things, and we can also create new things that we can manipulate. And other species, unfortunately, well, they don't have this in particular. They don't have the hand and the dexterity. So this plays in our cognitive horizon version of what is intelligence. This is critical.
Mhm.
And what do we do with it? We do art, would be my other, these two things feed on each other,
Mhm.
allow us to create knowledge that we can pass on, and keep evolving that knowledge. And this happens not just through generations, but through your own life.
Mhm.
Um, and it would be fantastic if we find another species that has this capacity to some extent, but I'm not aware that there is anything like that.
So the key thing is like we're starting from a very sort of like privileged position where humans sort of like, particularly with the rise of conservatism and right-wing, basically full-out chauvinist ideology again, it's sort of like easier to sort of like speak to the public and say, yeah, humans are unique and everything else should basically go fuck itself. But
Well, that's not what I'm saying, but anyway.
that's not what you say. That's not what you're saying. But the key thing is, um, wouldn't it be wouldn't it be good to start from a position where we actually ask the question if this is really putting us sort of apart? We got hands, that puts us over, like as Douglas Adams has said, it puts us over the eye because we use a stick to get the ant out of the tree bark, and we don't have to run around with these like long middle fingers, basically. But and which would stick technology allows us to sort of like eventually fly airplanes, which are sort of elaborate sticks and stuff like that. But we don't have octopus skin. So there's a lot of things that we don't have as humans where we quote unquote less talented in a sense. We have less optical variance than other
Yeah.
animals. We have less sonic capabilities than other animals, and so on. And so the question is like, what are these kinds of intelligences that work in a similar way? And there, I think it all boils down to this sort of like, and I hate the word tool, sort of to instrument use. And there, I think we get to sort of like the core of your, with the sort of like, let's say theoretical background that you brought to the table, which I think you can sort of like plug that out and plug something else in, which basically, let me just like give one example. Like in archaeology, at some point, you have this discussion about like what is art, what is technology, because what we consider art, like the stuff that is rectangular and lives in white cubes and is praised by Hans Ulrich Obrist and sold by Larry Gagosian, that is not sort of like what sort of the general definition of what artifacts are for humans in general. And in Greek times, for example, the term ars and the term techne are so close to each other, it's really hard to, you can easily spend hours just debating these two words, and you don't get any closer in a sense, like, sort of like differentiating the two. Both of them are far away from what we now call art or the subject of art history. And so the key question is, um, doesn't this put machines and whatever you call art or artifacts, like the waste product of a process called art, sort of like in the same realm, sort of like they're the kind of stuff we deal with, and some of this stuff is interactive. But that's not any different than humans ascribing activity to a rock or whatever. Only there's something actually happen, but also if you have cognition in humans talking about that rock, there is also something happening. So which is external to yourself. And so the question is, in this kind of interaction, do we need a sort of different definition, uh, other than sort of like this sort of like machines being computer science, art being the domain of artists, and sort of like, whatever humans are is a term of psychology. Isn't that the artificial division of our disciplines? And maybe we should sort of like approach this in different ways.
Yeah, yes, I was trying to, one of the things I tried to propose is that it's a co-evolutionary process, the machine, the evolution of machines, the evolution of art. Uh, they go together, they feed on each other. They cannot be dissociated. It wouldn't happen. The art would not change without new tools, new ways of using it, using these and new designs. And we wouldn't conceive of new tools and new machines without uses for them. And the way I conceive of art as being a big, one of the, I think, the major reason that we keep evolving our tools and so-called machines. So bringing those two worlds together is actually not even needed because they've always been together. But that's one point you raised. But the other point about me emphasizing what makes us different versus the rest of nature. I mean that would be. I mean, I'd be happy to discuss how I see that as well. But of course, we cannot be dissociated from the rest of nature because I mean, if we start studying the understanding we have so far of biology in general, it's clear that we exist because we are part of ecosystems and we have plenty of bacteria and all that are not human in our gut and etc. And without it, we don't live. And we are, in a way, we're like fish. We're not in water, but we're in the air, and things are going through us all the time, and it's full of living things and non-living things. So we could go in that direction. But the reason for AIM is that through the years, I've too often noticed that combining scientific approaches and artistic considerations or understanding or practices is often seen as odd, not a natural way of exploring humans, let's say. And I disagree. And my reason for emphasizing that as an agenda is motivated by the way it's portrayed, especially in areas like computer science, let's say, or engineering in general. So usually, your upbringing in these disciplines, which has been where I came from, there's very little about the history of art, for example, and how humans have keep refining or changing the way they portray and they represent the world or things or imagination. So I did mention in my talk that I was very influenced when I came across one book by Rudolf Arnheim. Of course, it's not the only influence, but that was sort of a trigger that got me interested in the fact that these two worlds should be together. So I'm biased, but I'm doing it consciously because I feel there's a lack or a need for it in more in the world of science and technology.
I fully agree with you. Mike has another question. We only have 10 minutes. Do you want to come over?
Series of short sort of short comments, yes. One is, and they are sort of, one thing is actually indeed the question of how unique humans are compared to everybody else are is very interesting. And as far as I know, there is sort of ongoing amazing amount of new information about sort of proto-cultural things in different animals, not only apes, but for example, some sort of birds, which happen to apparently transfer knowledge. But that is all sort of very small droplets of things. So I would argue, sort of in opposition to Marx, that the idea of just saying that everything is a continuum and everything gradually one grows into another is as much or even larger oversimplification than to say that humans are completely distinct. There is a gradient, but it is very, very steep, basically, between. Yes, and a second small thing I wanted, going back to our discussion about this kinetic versus static view of patterns. One thing I remembered, which sort of strongly resonates in it, at least in my feeling, that apparently there was some study of how professional chess players grasp and remember the chess positions, that they're extremely fast in remembering sort of natural positions which come as a part of a game. But if you show them a random position of chess figures on a board, which is not related to any natural sequence of moves, they're as bad as anybody else in remembering it. So it sort of seems to show that indeed there is some sort of idea of recognizing a pattern not just as a pattern but as a result of some sequence of moves. And the third thing, because we have it was just sort of a side comment. Third thing I wanted to rephrase in my own words some part of your motivation, just to understand that I grasp correctly what you were trying to say. Basically, when you talked in the very beginning about the robot drawing portraits, my immediate reaction was basically, why should I bother about this elaborate thing which sort of takes in an anthropomorphic hand some sort of pen or whatever, that why not just put a piece of paper into a printer and have it print me a perfectly nice portrait. But as far as I understand, your point is exactly that to study this sort of thing is important to understand, in a sense, human condition, because human intelligence is inseparable from the way it sort of it is done through the human body, and therefore that is basically the reason why it is interesting to study this sort of thing.
Yes, I would say yes. Thank you. Yes, definitely from the viewpoint of, let's say, the person who tries to get a deeper understanding of what is it about human intelligence, and then of course there's the art practice side. So the interest for the artist, like Patrick Tressel, let's say, can be the same. Like I think he's interested also in human understanding, what triggers interest in humans, but he's definitely interested in extending his practice and exploring other ways of creating interesting artifacts. And this became the case for him, that while he was with us, it was more about sort of scientific engineering type of approach. And eventually he realized, since he had been a practicing artist before that through the 90s, he realized, oh, well, actually, I'm also interested in doing art. And here's a field where I can explore another way of extending what is possible to do with portraiture or with other types of outcomes. In his case, also, I think he's interested in how the humans around the the people who come and experience the process, the actual performance.
Mhm.
He's interested in designing it, and he's interested in the reactions of the humans. And so for me, what's interesting in that is that by having such systems, you can also perhaps study why are we why can we be interested in a machine doing a portrait, like, which is what a bit what you were sort of saying initially. Why not just print a very elaborate portrait with a printer? Well, if you watch the printer, it's not interesting, right? But if you watch Patrick's robots, because they're not like a human, but they have a body, they
Mhm.
are acting, they are making noises. So there is all this, you realize that everybody becomes quite interested. What's happening here? And I think maybe people don't realize it, but they're interested in themselves in a way, I would say. They're interested in
Mhm.
that's what I did when I was a kid, or that's what I know a human does when they realize art. And so this sort of practice of creating robots that do things like humans is also interesting in that sense. It's that it sort of goes back. It's a mirror image of ourselves, and we might like that re-engage also with the artistic practices.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So
Thank you.
we hit the 2 hour mark. So I need to do
Yeah.
what I always do. First, thank you. So this was great.
Thank
Uh,
you. No,
could
it's fun.
totally talk way more. Would have had another topic which I find quite interesting, which is Leibniz famously says that space and time as extensions are secondary to the constitution of space. So cognition comes first in the constitution of space, and extension is sort of optional. And so there's this rather interesting thing because you said, correctly so, for your whole thing, that sort of like, spatial extension and temporal extension is needed in order for us sort of to function. But that nevertheless, there is this sort of like notion, like sort of like, how does this, like, is that sort of like the projection of our imagination, or is it like, is imagination different? What's the residue that's not time and space and stuff like that? Which is sort of something I'm very interested in terms of art history. And with these multidimensional embedding spaces, both in sort of like regular computer vision, AI, image production, and whatever, but also in your sort of your representations of what's happening in this robot arm, like how that it's a multidimensional representation, right? So there's a sort of like really interesting thing where this other question where you say, oh, human asks about themselves, but they recognize the stuff they can do, like what the arm does, but then they know the robot is different in their head than their head. And so what's that difference, I think, is a really, really big question, which will ever become more prominent. And so I thank you very much for sort of lining out sort of like this amazing field of inquiry. I'm pretty sure 50 other people will have 50 other interesting directions, which comes out of your research, which is really, really, really cool. Next week, we will have the last Open Lab seminar for the spring semester, and it will be Claudia Nunes Pacheco, sorry, who is an HCI researcher in Sweden. And we very much look forward to that too, which is sort of also still in the sort of like creative aesthetics, critical aesthetics realm. And yeah, with that, we will stop the recording. And thank you very much
Thank you.
such an amazing session.
Thank you.